again, this is not financial advice disclaimer, but let me ask. So, in terms of investment advice on Bitcoin, so you see Bitcoin as potentially not just a thing that you speculate over, like buy and sell, buy and sell, buy and sell, but it's something that you can just buy only. And I believe I've heard that you own quite a large percentage of your wealth in Bitcoin, and you're basically buying only
Yeah.
and storing long term. So that's something that's a legitimate way to approach Bitcoin in your recommendation.
Go to other cultures. So if we remove ourselves from the Western world culture of investing and gamification of financial markets and the financialization of everything, let's say we go to the culture of India. For hundreds, if not thousands of years, families basically saved their wealth in gold and in jewelry and in these hard assets with the expectation to pass it on to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be blasphemous to sell the family's gold in that culture, right? You know, your great grandfather gave it to your grandfather gave it to your father gave it to you, right? And so in that culture, the long-term kind of holding is the default. I think that what Bitcoin has presented again is a digital application of the exact same thing, which is that while everything else in the world is being devalued, that is denominated in a currency that is being inflated away, whether it's quickly or not, this finite supply, this scarce asset ends up accruing more and more value over time, right? And so I think that for me personally, I've got over 95% of my net worth that's in this.
Over 95% of your net worth.
There's two important caveats to this. One is I didn't, buy some Bitcoin in 2011 or 12, right? And then all of a sudden it appreciated a bunch and it grew into that. But from a cost basis perspective, I put $100 and now it's a ton of money. Instead, what I did was I basically in 2018 saw Bitcoin from a US dollar price standpoint was falling and falling and falling. And in December of 2018, I decided to take about 50% of my net worth and convert it from dollar denominated assets into Bitcoin. So it was a very kind of intentional decision with a very specific view on the world as to like why I was doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I then essentially just let it sit there, grow, whatever, until the spring of 2020. And when I saw the government step in and start to say, hey, we're going to really be aggressive in terms of interest rate manipulation and quantitative easing, I then decided to go ahead and take basically the remainder and start to convert it as well. And so I became very aggressive in doing that. And so the way that I look at it is that's actually my savings, right? And so in some weird way, if I said to you, what's the dollar worth? You'd say, well, a $1 bill is worth $1, right? Bitcoin, to me, I denominate my wealth in Bitcoin. So I think of one Bitcoin is worth one Bitcoin, not one Bitcoin is worth 60,000 or 55,000 or 70,000, right? I denominate everything in Bitcoin. When I make a purchase in my head, I'm calculating how much Bitcoin am I spending right now, right? Well, guess what happens? When you have a devaluing currency as the denominator, doesn't matter, right? Like you're financially incentivized to spend or invest, right? To consume. When you have an appreciating currency, all of a sudden you become much less consumptive in your behavior.
Yeah.
Because you're actually trading off future purchasing power for the consumption today.
It's fascinating to think that if when you move about this world, you think in Bitcoin, you behave differently as if you think in dollars. That's really fascinating.
People, but here's the thing is the last 50 years or so is actually the outlier in history. Most people used to think this way.
Yeah.
It's only when a fiat currency got introduced that one argument, the positive argument or perspective, is there was an explosion in growth.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's because there was a financial incentive to consume.
Yeah.
Right? And there's nobody better in the world than the United States at consuming. And we consume anything and everything. And if you want to see a great example, look at how big the Coca-Colas are at McDonald's, right? You go to other places, they don't serve them that big. And so the other example, though, or the negative argument is we have to consume. Because if not, you end up being the bottom 45% of Americans that held no investable assets and actually are just having their wealth devalued away. So holding the dollars end up being a very bad economic decision. And so when you then switch to this sound money, you say, wait a second, why would I, if today I can trade one Bitcoin, back in October of last year, one Bitcoin for 10,000 US dollars, why would I spend that if at some point in the future, whether it's a month from now or 10 years from now, I could trade it for something much, much more than that? You just become much more of a anti-consumer and much more of a long-term thinker.
Yeah, from the individual perspective, that's pretty powerful. I wonder, I think that's an interesting debate. What's better for the long-term economy? No, better for the growth of the civilization, because capitalism is fascinating. It seems to work pretty well. There's this kind of like Eric Weinstein says that one of the problems is, for the past several decades, this whole economy, society is built on the idea that we have to keep growing. It depends on that idea. And it's a good question whether that's going to result in huge problems, or if, like a college student on a deadline, the dependence on growth will mean that we'll have to grow. Like the fear of death will force us to grow.
But I think there's a false equivalency between we're dependent on growth, and then if the world was denominated in sound money, we don't grow. What I think ends up happening is we remove a lot of the society's bullshit.
Yeah.
Because right now, when the money is free, or the currency is free, you can come up with all kinds of crazy stuff and people will give it to you, right?
Yeah.
When all of a sudden it's really, really valued by the population,
the decisions are better.
Yeah, you have to provide real value in the goods and services you provide in order to get them to give it to you.
There's less room for corruption, less room for manipulation. That's not actually productive. Yeah, definitely. So you said you moved a lot of your investment into Bitcoin. Is there, when you look, so you're a special human being in many ways. So you're like a strategic thinker, but you're also like a deep thinker about this whole thing. But when you look at a regular pleb like me, in terms of just investing and moving into thinking about cryptocurrency, is there a strategy that you recommend? What are the different options about investing into Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I think that there's just kind of timeless advice when it comes to investing or acquiring an asset in general. Dollar cost averaging is usually the best way to think about it. And what I mean by that is most people don't just have a pile of currency sitting there, right? It's not like they have $1 million sitting in their bank. It's like, what do I do with it? That situation aside, what happens is they trade their hours and their effort for currency. And so as they get paid every 2 weeks, let's say, the best way to acquire Bitcoin without having to worry about timing markets and being a professional trader is to simply take whatever the percentages that you want and to buy Bitcoin when you get your paycheck. So if you get paid on the 1st and 15th of every month, on that day, you should go take, let's say it's 3% of your paycheck. Take 3%, go buy Bitcoin. Don't worry about what the price is. Just do that over time. And the reason why that's important is if in December of 2017, when Bitcoin was at $20,000, it was the height of kind of this last big upwards movement, you had taken all of your money and you had put it into Bitcoin. You would have had to wait almost 3 years just to get back to quote unquote break even in US dollar terms. If at the same time you had simply bought then, and over the next 3 years bought every 2 weeks, you would have been up hundreds of % 3 years later. Because what ended up happening was you bought a bunch of Bitcoin when it was at 15, 12, 10, 9, 8, 3, 4, 5, 5, 5, all the way back up on the other side. And so dollar cost averaging is one of these weird things that it almost sounds too easy. But what we find is in America, we have a lack of financial education. And so rather than try to be smarter than markets,